Most of what we focus on in these workshops is telling the personal story. And in this, we kind of guide individuals to first find what their narrative is through some sort of brainstorming activity, whether it be kind of doing some sort of word map or kind of stream of consciousness writing, some sort of way to get those juices flowing. Then they work on actually turning that into a sort of 4-paragraph narrative setting. And then we work with them to digitally record that spoken audio narrative. And then they think about how this sort of oral storytelling tradition can then be also turned into and paired with visuals. And so through that, they do this sort of storyboard where they think about either using photographs or hand drawings and kind of what visuals they want to go with that spoken narrative. And also when I say narrative, usually it ends up being around 2 to 3 minutes long total. Then we work with them to actually capture those visuals for those narratives, and then they work on editing it all together. So thinking about the timing of how the visuals pair with that audio track. And then they add in different sort of touches like music and sound effects or silence or black or whatever sort of effects that would help enhance that story. And then finally, they can export and share. And sharing is as simple as clicking with an email or a text message nowadays with digital storytelling. And then real briefly, I just wanted to kind of go over this process that we call story circle. And so part of this is we actually have these workshops, they're group workshops. And so not only are they focusing on their own personal narrative and project, but also sharing that with others. And so when they go through this process, there's 3 different points of these workshops in which they actually share their progress with the group as a whole. And that helps build confidence for one, but also helps to build community and this sort of small mini storytelling community that forms per workshop. And so the first time that a story circle happens is when they're first sort of trying to verbalize and figure out what that story is about. So a lot of that it's much more free and not even maybe fully formed sentences, but just kind of getting those ideas out. Then the second time that they have a story circle is when they're actually sharing that written narrative, and then they actually get feedback from the group on that story. And then the last, of course, is sharing that final digital narrative with the group and kind of talking about their challenges that they've overcome and also like what it means to actually share that final story. So I actually wanted to share one of these kind of examples of digital storytelling with you guys really fast. And so this specific example that I'm going to share is from a workshop, like I said, that I did with the Story Center, but it's where I hosted a series of digital storytelling workshops that took place over the course of 4 months throughout last summer. And they were all part of what was called the State of Stories program. And that was for the Missouri bicentennial. So there's a lot of other programming around storytelling going on. But really the core of what this State of Stories was about was, what does place mean to you? And specifically, I guess, Missouri in this case. And is there a specific sort of memory that maybe is attached with place and with Missouri for you? And also, has maybe place helped you to overcome something? So these were some of the prompts that I gave these individuals going through this workshop with me to kind of consider how place, and specifically Missouri, helped to shape an aspect of their life. And so this story is by Leslie Harris, and it's called A Time of Refreshment at Powell Gardens, which is near Kansas City. I think it's on the sort of like outside a little bit to the east of it. So I'm going to share this story with you really fast so you can kind of see what we're talking about.
In the quaint country town of Kingsville, Missouri, which is located about 15 minutes east of Lee Summit on US Highway 50, is an exquisite attraction of bounteous wonder and beauty. It is here that we find the Powell Botanical Gardens. It never ceases to take my breath away anytime I visit. Here is where I learn the other 3 R's: relaxation, rejuvenation, and restoration, if only for a short time. I felt as if I were safe at my rock of refuge. A chapel on the premises gave me the opportunity to reflect in peaceful solitude and meditation, uninterrupted by the sounds of a fast-paced world. As a lover of God's handiwork, I breathe in the air that refreshes my cancer-ridden body and weary soul. My spirits are uplifted. I am aware of others around me enjoying these much-needed peaceful moments and taking it all in without a care in the world. Before I knew it, I had walked quite a distance. Benches are located nearby to sit for a few minutes. I am simply mesmerized by the floral arrangements and landscaping skills of these outdoor artists. Crossing over the bridge, I am drawn to the beauty of the water lilies beckoning me to enjoy their uniqueness. Trolley cars are available at certain pickup and drop-off points. I chose to walk. I've even passed by a wedding taking place in this scenic outdoor setting. On my visit, I have been inspired to learn tips for my own personal garden and improve my green thumb in the process. My mom would be so proud of me because gardening was her passion. I visited the gift shop where I was able to get other gardening ideas or just to pick up a souvenir from my visit. In the hustle and bustle of life, I try not to forget to take time to smell the roses along my journey's path. And that is just what I found at the Powell Gardens. It was the best medicine that a doctor could have ordered for me.
Sorry. Okay. So the really cool thing too about these workshops is most of the individuals who participate have never done anything like this before. So they've never made a video, they've never heard their own voice recorded before. And the cool thing is a lot of times participants not only come away with the story that they can share, but also this sense of accomplishment over these digital technologies. And then it's also then something that they can teach and share either generations to come or their friends, and just kind of empowering other people to also tell their own stories. And so I've done these kind of workshops a number of times through the Story Center at the library. And this is a image of before, I want to say, or no, after the renovations, and they're almost done with them now. So this is the historic Crouch family home, which was on the property of the library itself. And so they actually have remodeled and renovated for years and finally finished this project of converting this historic home into the Story Center. And so you can see the actual building of the library sort of behind it there. And so after doing these different workshops, hearing other people's stories from the community and kind of wanting to celebrate the opening of this historic home, I embarked on this other project with the Story Center to use projection mapping, which is where you take video and project it on the front of an architectural surface in order to tell some of the history to the home so that it's accessible for everybody to view. So like a public art project. And so I just want to chat a little bit about that. So in order to do this project, I had access to a lot of the archives that were collected about the historic home and the Crouch family itself. And so I kind of dug through all these historic photographs and found ones that had both historic and sort of aesthetic value as well. And so I started to figure out sort of what pairings would work best with each other for this artistic project. I also found both materials that other individuals had found and my own sort of objects that I found while they were renovating the house and kind of like excavating a lot of it. And so there was a lot of these really cool little shards of either like milk jugs, because that has to do with the family home, or little glass medicine bottles and other sort of artifacts that were found around the home that I then rephotographed like this. Like I said, milk was part of it because it was the Crouch Farm family dairy. And so those little little milk caps were found, even everything that was, what do you call it? Dry cleaning receipts, and other sort of farming tools as well were found. So I rephotographed all of these as well. And then I also became really intrigued by the fabrics that made up the history of this historic home. So a lot of these materials were taken out of the house for the renovation, but they are still preserved. And so I rephotographed them to preserve them even further. Oops. Found an old recipe book. And so I kind of redocumented a lot of these hand-drawn and also kind of like magazine cutout recipes to incorporate into the project. Then also another big part is the actual surrounding landscape, which is the prairie land, right? And so that's kind of, if you ever go to the library itself, and I encourage you all, since you're even closer than me, to go and visit this place. There's beautiful, beautiful land right behind it. And I spent lots of time exploring the land and documenting the land because that's what was really important to the house itself too, and the history of the library. So this is kind of, and excuse the sort of poor quality screenshot here. This is kind of what it looks like when you create the actual map of how it's going to look like when you project it onto the building. And so each of the windows, and you'll see in a second, of the house, which was here. Oops. Sorry, each of the windows will have one of those historic photos or the documentation of historic materials that I found will be projected onto the windows. And then the rest of the house will have that landscape projected onto it. And so you can see also some rocks and different sort of organic materials that I found around the house. And again, that fabric, right? And so we did a test of the project, a test run back in July. And that's when I actually kind of did a mini artist in residence to create the project itself. So these are test photos that were in the summer before the project was complete and before the housing renovation was complete. Unfortunately, because of COVID and because of the renovation slowing to the house, we had to postpone the actual public presentation of the project till this spring. So these are just some kind of test shots of what it's going to look like though. So you can see this sort of prairie land and this natural landscape that's projected onto this part. And then they didn't install them yet, but there's actually these really cool window shades that makes the images pop more that you'll see of those actual artifacts that were found. So it's kind of taking both the inside and history of the house and that story of the house and bring it to the outside surface for everybody to be able to see in a public way. And one of these is the video. So these are iPhone videos, so don't judge the quality. So I just wanted to share this with you because I thought it was an interesting and different way of utilizing digital storytelling that maybe you haven't seen before, and also a way that place and story can be integrated into a digital project. So I just wanted to also kind of pitch this, that Prairies and Antiquities, which is the name of the project, of the projection mapping project, will be on display Friday, April 8th and Saturday, April 9th at the Woodneath Library Center in Kansas City. I hope you all can make it. And there'll also be an artist lecture, I think that I'll do on Saturday at some point in the afternoon. And they also have a whole programming of different artists too that will be talking that day. And it's free for everybody. So you guys should all come if you want to see. And I have to say, projection mapping is something that has to be experienced in person, really, to get the sort of awe of it. So
how does qualitative research, if we might call it that, maybe you can, if you don't like that term, tell me. But I think that that's something that, as part of this summit, we're trying to figure out how we can move away from these particular methodologies that have been privileged historically and look at storytelling as a methodology that should be taken as seriously. And so in talking about place, what is it about storytelling that can tell you about a place in a different way than, say, statistics?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, that's an interesting question because for example, take the workshop, right? That and I had a total of, I think, I can't remember off the top of my head, I think 8 final participants for that 4-month workshop. And their prompt was place, right? I mean, that was the prompt for where they were supposed to begin thinking about their story. So it's not like they came with a story and then thought about how place should be integrated, but rather, what does place mean to me, and what stories come around that. And the interesting thing about this is pre-pandemic, pretty much the majority of the reach of the Story Center was individuals located in and around Kansas City, right? Because it's programming for a community library for that community. However, after the pandemic, so all of these workshops were virtual, I only had, I think, 2 people from the Kansas City area. Everybody else participating in these workshops was from all over. Not only, we even had somebody from a different country participate. And so then, even though it was interesting because it's supposed to be a state of stories in terms of Missouri, but we had to completely sort of change that and think about, no, what does your specific place where you're living, and it wasn't necessarily where they grew up, right? But like, how has a certain place where you currently reside then shaped you, is more what it had to turn into. So I think this idea of place now is even more so changing since the pandemic, because we're able to sort of have these sort of insights, right, into other people's places, and also there's more, I would say, documentation of place now, especially within like social media. Like you have that whole what was it called, whereas like other people's windows, where people would take every day a photo outside of their window, and so you had a sense of that. And so I think people are now having more of that realization, real connection, sort of to exploring where they are, because you almost have sort of not no other choice, but we're spending so much more time thinking about what these sort of like 4 walls and where we can exist, like how that affects us. I think that there's something so important and special about going back to your roots, going back to those places that are where your roots are, and seeing and having conversations with everybody that's there currently. I know I'm Greek American. My grandfather emigrated from Greece, and I went back to Greece this past winter. And I was just, it was so interesting because there were so many questions about why I'm the way I am that I never understood until I went there and started having conversations with people. It's like, why do I love the water so much? I live in the middle of Missouri. Well, it's because I'm Greek. Why do I love, and so that there's so many different things. But when you said cemeteries, that really popped in my ear, because in my own personal artwork, I use a lot of red thread and red ribbon and just the color red to tie things together, also to represent connection to those that we've lost. And I just did it. And then when I went to Greece, I noticed all of their historic cemeteries and gravestones were painted with red ribbon. And I'm like, you gotta be kidding me. So I'm doing more research on that now. And it's like lit up this huge thing in my brain. But then when you mentioned that, I'm like, oh my gosh, like there's just so many questions by like researching the, these roots, but then actually traveling, experiencing these places that can really affect us in the current time and pass those on to generations to come as well.
Okay, Katina, I'm curious if you've developed your own framework for the different elements or aspects of storytelling, or if you used any particular software. So it's maybe a more technical question about the software pieces. The framework, you can interpret that how you like, but
yeah. So software, I guess, which project are you referring to, Karen? Just because they're different for the two.
Well, I guess I'm wondering about just from the very beginning, when you design this project, when you have the workshops, if they have a framework to populate, their stories digitally, or, so I guess it could be for either one of them. I think that, the map projection you talked briefly about for the one project, which was great. But even for the one for Powell Gardens, I mean, was there any, I guess that one's pretty straightforward, but I just wondered if there was any framework that they could work from or be introduced to kind of help them tell their stories, I guess.
Definitely. Yeah. So technically wise, for those workshops, I primarily work with iPads. The reason why is, and I didn't talk about this at all today, but a large portion of what these workshops, I do them for research purposes, for caregivers of those who are recently bereaved. and I'm sorry, bereaved caregivers, said that backwards. And so I do it a lot for sort of like this meaning making purpose. And so there's a whole sort of like framework for that. But the thing about iPads is you can both shoot video, photo, and edit all in one sort of unit. So it's really easy just to use that. But in terms of like how people actually think about and develop their stories, yeah, they go through, like I said, both the series of story circles, but also there's a lot of sort of conversations that we have about how to build their stories. There's prompts, there's sort of like little mini activities to get their sort of stories going. So there's kind of this whole sort of 3-day sort of workshop system that we have them kind of go through. So it's not just like, do it and here's your iPad.
Storytelling just in general is such an intimate way of sharing a message, and digital storytelling is particularly great because it's so easily accessible and it can be shared so easily. And thinking about your question, Tamara, of how to make academic research more accessible in this way, I think storytelling provides a great tool because, in my experience, researchers there's a lot of intimacy that they have with their research projects, and the work that they're doing is quite intimate. And whether people don't necessarily share that intimacy with others and don't understand that that's where they can really connect and resonate. And so I think digital storytelling allows people to show some of the intimacy, become a bit vulnerable with their research and share some of that. And capturing it through a digital story or story map is something that we can do and people are inclined to do right now. So I think it's a great time to capture that and encourage scholars to share that passion and that intimacy that they have, I know they have experienced and always do. So that's just the point I wanted to make.
And just to echo Sarah, 100%, I agree with you. And we even had one research project too, where we had healthcare providers go through these sort of workshops where they had to make their own digital stories, trying to help them reconnect to why they started practicing medicine in the first place. Because sometimes there's that sort of like disconnect between patient and provider. And so I think kind of like backing it up and using story as that mechanism to really connect back to that sort of like humanistic quality of medicine. So that's just some 2 cents about that part.
Like, I'll just quickly say, obviously, telling stories, what people love about storytelling is how personal it is. Like when we learn how to teach in any way that we teach, we're trying to bring in ourselves, and this is a way to bring ourselves in. So I love your point, Sarah, about the intimacy, that it doesn't have to be this cold, linear research, that it can be rich, it can be empathic, it can involve the emotions.